Hey, hi, welcome to your special Q&A for being part of the Solution Center. And welcome. I hope this helps you. Frankly, I didn't have anybody chime in so far with questions, but I'm going to talk about pleasure, like I warned you, for about 10 minutes. And then I actually got an email from a mom that I think you will find interesting and helpful, so we can talk about that. And if anyone pops in, then we'll talk to them. All right, thanks. So here we go. Pleasure. I just went to not just, but earlier in the year, I went to the Sex Ed conference, which is a thing. It is kind of crazy. Sex educators from all over the world come and we gather and we learn and we talk to each other and figure out like what's happening in the world. And I was lucky enough to connect with some really great folks who do what I do. Anyway, pleasure. This is something that we have to talk to our kids about. And one of the classes I took said something that really kind of hit home for me and also made me feel a little ashamed because I hadn't thought about this in this way, even though I'd been preaching it, sort of. This is what they said. They said that if we start the conversation about sex and sexuality with the lens that it is all about pleasure, then our kids are going to have a different experience when they become sexually active in whatever way that looks like. Right now, what we do is we focus on intercourse and baby making and all this scary stuff, right? Like we don't want our kids to get pregnant or get STIs or be in crappy relationships. So do you see how we're focusing on all the negative stuff? And so their recommendation, and I actually agree, and so I'm trying to do this, so I'm like learning, is to flip the script essentially and talk about what healthy relationships look like. This is what you should expect. You should expect sex to feel good. When you're making out with somebody, that should feel good to you. You should feel like you should want to do it and you should agree to do it. And, and planting those seeds of consent, like sex is something people agree to do together. And I, of course, like the phrase, the rule is that everybody says yes to whatever is happening, and that could even be hand holding and hugging and then all the way on up to doing the deed, whatever that looks like. So I think that this is going to change a whole lot of how we talk with our kids about sex. I also think it's going to be a challenge. And the reason I think it's a challenge is because the sex talking is already a challenge. And so there's that. The other thing is that when we talk about pleasure, that means we're talking about our kids having sex, like real, full on, getting busy, having orgasms, sex. And I know that I am not interested in thinking about my child having that kind of sex. I want him to have that kind of sex. And so I think we use this kind of science-y approach, which I advocate in certain ways, in a way that helps us to feel kind of safer instead of, like emotionally safer, instead of kind of talking about this more uncomfortable aspect of sexuality, again, especially when we think about our kids. So here's what I recommend. So next time you have a chit chat with your kiddos, I want you to say, hey, I don't know if we've talked about this. And here's the deal. Most of the time when people are having sex or doing sexual stuff, like kissing, hugging, making out, that kind of thing, they're doing it because it feels good. And I recommend you say it feels good to their grown-up bodies. And I know sexual touch, like masturbation, feels good to, a kid body. But when we're talking about intimacy between people, sexuality between people, I think it's really important to emphasize the grown-up body piece, because sometimes kids can get confused and they're thinking, then I should do the sex because I want to feel good. So that emphasis on grown-up bodies. I don't personally say adults because teenagers do sexual stuff, right? So I say grown-up bodies, like when you're a teenager and you get older, right? So I am all about, waiting to do anything, waiting to have sex because that's the riskiest thing you can do, but just like easing into the sexual relationship piece. And I'm pretty sure most of you are too. I'm not a fan of 11-year-olds dating, which is a thing in, certain families or whatever. So it's a thing. People do that. So emphasizing the pleasure piece is not going to encourage them to have sex. They're going to have sex no matter what. We do know that the more sexually educated your kids are, they tend to wait a little bit longer. They're more thoughtful about when they do have sex, and then they're more protected. They are more clear about consent. They tend to have sex in safer places. Condoms are on the scene. So, they're, like I said, they're going to do it. And so don't worry about focusing on pleasure. And I think for women and girls in particular, we set aside, or we don't want to admit, or we're embarrassed to ask for pleasure and to expect pleasure when we're having sex. I know people, when they were younger and sexually active, that I didn't ask for things that would make me feel good. I let him do whatever he kind of wanted and rolled with it and did my own things. So I think that, especially with girls, they should know that sex should feel good, and they should be able to ask for what feels good to them, and not to be ashamed or embarrassed or shy. And boys need to know that girls feel pleasure too, and they need to ask, like, does this feel good? What would feel good to you? Which takes some kind of grown-up communication skills, right? And I don't want to put this all in heterosexual framework, so let me just mention that. But most people at least start off in heterosexual relationships, so having sex with or doing sexual things with someone who is not the same gender as them. When it comes to kids who are the same gender, same deal, right? Like, hey, this should feel good to your body. We want to talking about consent, and making sure your kids are really clear. 99.999% of the time, people are having sex and doing sexual things because it feels good. Pretty much no other reason to do it. People are actively trying to make babies, and they're not actively trying to make babies. Most of the time, people who are having penis and vagina sex are actively trying not to make babies. And of course, people who have matchy parts, they're not going to be able to make a baby through sex. Anyway, so that's my whole thing about pleasure. And I am really making an effort when I'm teaching to put this at the front, because I think if we're going to be sex positive, which means seeing sex and sexuality as a positive, healthy, fun, important part of life, that's a wonderful message. And, I think that if you just think about for a few minutes, like, what would your sexuality, what would your sex life be like if all the messages, or the most of the messages you got from your most influential people, your parents or your primary caregiver, if that emphasis was on pleasure, you might have made different decisions. I probably would have. And so I'm guessing you might have too. All right, so that's my 10 minutes or so on pleasure. Look at that, I'm looking at the clock. That's my 10 minutes or so on pleasure. So if after you watch this, if you have questions, you want more help with the scripting, please don't hesitate to email me. You know how to contact me, amy@birdsandbeesandkids.com. And I have some other resources to help you look at this from that perspective. Okay. I don't have any Q&A, people. Nobody emailed me with a Q&A, but I got a really good one from a mom in Texas. Texas, really conservative, really shitty sex education. However, the world has expanded and kids learn all kinds of different things, and sort of from their lives, and also on the internet. And so I think that in those communities where they have terrible sex education, kids are actually getting good information, and they're also getting some shitty information. I'm not quite sure why I'm talking about that. But anyway, so here's the letter she sent me. Email. Sorry. I have the menopause, and it's making me kind of a dingbat. Side note, TMI. Okay, so I got an email. So it was from a stepmom who said that her 12-year-old stepdaughter confided in her that she's bisexual and she's dating one of her really good friends. And she told the stepmother, and they have the daughter 2 days a week. And she was really surprised that the stepdaughter confided in her. The girl's mom and grandmother, who are, her main caregivers, are very conservative. And what happened is that she and her husband also have a 3-year-old. And the 3-year-old said something about, when I grow up, I'm going to marry a girl. Like, she's a girl. 3-year-olds say these things, right? And the grandmother hopped in and said, oh no, that's not okay. You can't marry a girl. And it's against I don't think she said it's against the law, but she was very clear. You can't marry a girl. That's not okay. That's not a thing we do. Homophobic, right? Okay, so then the mom popped in and said, that's not true. You can marry a girl. You can marry a girl, you can marry a boy, you can marry whoever you want. And so, that's not true. So she said that in front of the grandmother and in front of the stepdaughter. And she thinks that the reason the stepdaughter confided in her was because she overheard her say that. And so she knew she could trust her because her stepmom had said, basically, I'm down, like, with whoever you love. I'm okay with that. And so she confided in her. Of course, she said, don't tell my dad. But the mom did, because this is an important part of her stepdaughter's life. And also, she's this stepdaughter. If it had been her mom and she'd asked that, I might give a little bit different advice about that, but because there's that little one-off relationship. So she told the dad. Dad's totally fine. But here's the question. Mom and grandma are totally super conservative Christians. They do not think being gay is okay. They don't understand it. They wouldn't understand like what she means by being bi, and they would not be able to handle the fact that she's 12. So the parents are struggling with this too. I'm just going to aside over here for a second. They're struggling with this too, mostly because it's hard to think about a child being dating someone if they're straight. And then I think it just adds the kind of pressure if she's bi or gay. And that's because, of course, we know how hard it is to be bi or gay for kids. So that's a little aside. Anyway, back to the mom and the grandma. So they were really worried about that. And what I told them is that they do not need to know. She should not tell them. Her health and safety are at stake. They don't, she doesn't know how they're going to react. She doesn't know what they'll do, what they'll say. They'll probably shame her. They may punish her. They may do all kinds of things. And my recommendation in those circumstances is to have that gal keep it private. And the other thing I recommended, which I actually don't generally recommend, I am not a person who lies, which is sometimes uncomfortable. But in this circumstance, if the mother or the grandmother confronts her directly, I told them that she should lie straight up, because again, she needs to protect herself. Her primary caregivers are not supportive. And if she already knows that and has a plan, she'll feel better and she'll do better. And then later, when she's older, when she's a late teenager, when she's in her 20s, when she can hold her ground against these grandparent crazy pants, sorry, judgment. Did you already do that? Then she can tell them, then she can talk to them, because she'll be able to manage them. Right now, she cannot manage their anger. She cannot manage their freak out. She cannot manage their confusion. She can't manage their fear. So I'm a fan of lying if that's the circumstance for a child. Okay, and then back to her supportive dad and stepmom. So they are going to be the place that she goes when she needs help, because her stepmom was so chill about it and so good about it. She's just increased her trust with this girl like crazy. And this is what we all want for our kids. We want them to trust us. Now, this poor stepmom was like, what the hell do I do? Because it was kind of out of the blue. But when we talked about it, she understood that it really wasn't out of the blue because of this one kind of crystallizing moment. Anyway, so dad's a little meh about this, but he's all in. He's gonna like help her, support her. And then the other piece around the girls who are, I mean, this is happening pretty regularly. There's, lots of girls are saying they're bi or they're gay or they're asexual. And that's because they know about these things, right? They understand what they are. And so sometimes they will have relationships with their friends. And honestly, this doesn't necessarily mean anything. It's super common for girls who are 10, 11, 12 to experiment with each other. And in this culture right now, if they experiment with their friend, that they may decide that means that they're bi or they're gay. And they may be, and they also may not be. So if your kiddo says, I'm gay, I'm bi, whatever, your job is to just lean in and accept it 100%. And then wait and see who your child is and acknowledge the fact that, this is sexuality can be fluid or flexible, just keep us up to date. We'll support you no matter what. And then you got to support them no matter what. And if you're freaking out, excuse me, and can't handle this, then you need help. Your child probably does not need help. I mean, they may need some support, but you need help. And the place to get that is pflag.org. It's Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. PFLAG. Yeah. Anyway, long-standing organization, great organization, lots of support and help there. Because you've got to remember, at the end of the day, you want your kids to be whole, healthy, happy, and safe. And this is absolutely part of that. Okay, one more thing, and then I'm going to roll on out of here, is this. If you are a trustworthy, sex positive, which means you see sex as a positive, healthy part of life, adult, your kids' friends may come to you with hard stuff, easy stuff, questions. And so you need to be ready for that. Depending on how old the kiddo is, depending on what they're asking. Sometimes it's okay to keep those conversations private. Sometimes you're going to just need to tell, especially if they're middle school or so, or if you're like, oh no, I can't, this is not my job. I can't talk to you about this. But when they get into high school, I think it's okay to have a deal with them that they can talk to you and you'll talk openly with them. But the rule is that if their health or safety is at risk, then you have to tell the parent or the primary caregiver. Okay, so this is part of being part of the Birds and Bees and Kids Solution Center. You get to have me once every couple of months to chat with, to ask questions. So don't be shy. Like, I want to help you. We can do it live. You can send me email. I don't care. So if you're stuck or you need help, let me know. I'm happy to help you out. I want you to feel like you've got this and that you have me as your backup. All right. Have a good day. Share birdsandbeesandkids.com with your pals so we can get everybody sex educated so that when your kid's having sex with one of their kids, they're having a great, safe time.